evening, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an addict. Very glad to be here. I was given permission to leave at 9 p.m. because I need to go and make the dinner for the household then. So I'll be with you for another hour or so, just under an hour. My clean date is the 24th of July, 1993. My home group is in Brick Lane in London. I'm going to go straight in with 8 and 9 because there's a lot to talk about, and this isn't a newcomer specific meeting. If you are very new, a lot of this won't make sense, but some context will arise during the course of the talk. So, step 8 made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9 made direct amends to such people whenever possible, wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So it says, first of all, made a list. When you read the big book, you get to step 8, it says, you've got a list already, and, well, it's sort of true. If you've done a step 4, I met a girl once that had 4 lever arch files full of paperwork on her step 4. I can't boast such a prodigious output myself, but I had written along step 4. But the trouble is, step 4's got an awful lot of other stuff in it. It's got resentments and fears and disgusting things as well. The harms are just one small part of that. So what I had to do was to pull out specifically the behaviour which harmed other people. The examination should really be of any relationship where I behaved anything less than ideally, which would have affected someone else negatively. I sponsored someone once who was in their 60s and they'd had a pretty violent past, and all they came up with was 5 people they'd punched over the years. Now, that's not a bad start for your step 8, 5 people you've punched, but there's probably a few more than that. I've talked to people before. I asked someone once how many people did you make amends to? Did you make amends to everyone on your list? And she said, yes, both of them. And I wanted to say, if your behaviour has been so Christ-like your whole life that you've only ever negatively affected 2 people, you should write a book. You'd make 1,000,000 about how to do that. I was, in some ways, very quiet alcoholic and addict. I was on my own a lot. I was so odd when I was using, plus ça change, some might say, that there just weren't the people around to harm most of the time. People that got close pretty soon realised what they were dealing with, and they were off again before I could really do much damage. But even given those circumstances and the fact that I was 21 when I got clean, I'm mid-50s now, I still had a hefty number of people. And then when I was a number of years in, I had another very, very thorough go at step 8, and I found another 80 people. If you look, they're there. It doesn't matter if it's trivial. And it doesn't matter what nature the harm is. It does say made a list of all persons we had harmed. And this gives rise to interesting questions in 8 and 9, because often people have shoplifted, and I've sponsored a lot of people who've shoplifted. Shoplifting wasn't one of my things. I didn't know you were allowed to do it, which is, I think, the chief reason why I didn't do it. If I'd known you could do it, I would have done it, but I didn't think you're allowed. So anyway, I've sponsored people who did, and they try to go back to the branch where they did the shoplifting. That isn't who suffered. The branch didn't suffer. The branch manager didn't suffer. It's the shareholders of the supermarket who suffered. Who's behind it? Who's at the end of the chain? Harm. People say, well, what is harm? And it's actually a pretty simple list. You can harm people physically, you can damage their property, you can take their money, you can take their time, you can cause inconvenience. You can interfere in their affairs. You can intrude into their lives. You can damage their reputation. You can breach a confidence. You can breach trust. You can misdirect. I think that's one of the worst of all. You can be a malign influence on others. You can be of excessive help to others, stopping them from taking responsibility for their own lives. You can be of insufficient help, leaving people floundering. You can disrupt relationships and you can cause unnecessary upset. It's not hard to see what's harmful. If you think of the things which bother you, those are the things which are going to bother other people. So that's the trigger point for writing something down. It says we became willing to make amends to them all. And this is the little bit of context I think if you're new might make sense. Might make steps 8 and 9 make sense. So let's go back to the basics. If I go back into the world of using, I don't know if I'll come out of it. A friend of mine went back after many years, 22 years in recovery, and he was dead within 3. And he tried to turn the ship once he was using again, but it couldn't be turned. And all of the best people were around. Money was available to throw at the problem, but addiction is very strong. If one resumes, that could be the end of you. So that's my baseline. I must never resume. However, if I'm the captain of my own ship, I will use again. It's absolutely inevitable because my mind can't. My mind would need to be trustworthy 24 hours a day forever. No one's mind is trustworthy for 24 hours a day forever. I need to live in accordance with a system where I obey something other than the latest thought that's come into my mind. And so this is why we have this relationship with God, this relationship with the higher power. Now you could say, well, why not just go and live a good life like a nice person? Forget about the past, it's over now. I'm afraid that's not how it works. To start to behave well, I needed to take the steps, which meant, if we're looking at the central steps, 4 through 9, first of all, getting a handle on what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable, what was moral, what wasn't moral, what worked and what didn't work. I didn't have a good grip on that when I got clean, and that grip has been acquired only slowly. Secondly, up until that point, one's been rather attached to running through life, grabbing anything that is going to change the way one feels, trying to construct a life that looks impressive, that provides a degree of security against the natural insecurities of the world, and 100 other objectives. Those objectives needed to be prized from my clenched little fingers. My hands were like claws holding on to those schemes, plots, plans, designs. And it's only by a thorough review in step 4 that I understood at an emotional level the horror of how I'd been living. I think I'm doomed to repeat anything I don't confess and make amends for, hence confession and making amends. So the process of giving up the old way of life unfortunately involves inventory, confession and amends, and that's just the system. I'm not responsible for that being the system, it's simply there. I'm just reporting how things seem to work. I've not found a way of changing otherwise. When you look in the world, there are lots of people that try to change in all sorts of ways, and it doesn't work. This does, and it works very quickly. It works rather remarkably. So that's why this is here. So the willingness to make amends should arise out of a general understanding that one's going to remain trapped in one's old life forever unless one snips the ties. And any unmade amend, any unfit, this is and the last bit of that whole separation procedure, is to forgive everyone for everything, which is to withdraw the condemnation. It's not to retain the condemnation and to paste some sort of sentimental, patronising blessing on people. It's to withdraw the condemnation and call it quits and say there's nothing to condemn here. And if there is, what is worthy of condemnation is certainly not my business. And so the willingness, I think, must come from the understanding that these jobs need to be done and done completely. So when Ebby Thatcher visits Bill Wilson in New York in whatever it is, November, December 1934, he says, when these things were done, in other words, the steps, when the process is complete, he'll enter into a new relationship with his creator. I think we have a period of grace initially, rather like getting free passes for a gym. But eventually you're going to need to start paying your dues, or the free pass will run out. And paying one's dues means to complete that process of inventory, forgiveness, confession, and amends. Which means that everyone needs to be made amends to. It's not a matter of establishing willingness on a case-by-case basis, as though the merit of making amends is decided based on the particulars of the case. It's not. It's universal. If you were owed money by people, you would want the money paid on the basis of the principle that you're owed the money. And that would be the end of it. You'd think yourself very ill-used if the bank said, we're just in a process of generating some willingness, but willingness is a process, so you're just going to have to wait for that because it's going to be in God's time, the willingness, and so just please be patient because this is a spiritual thing. You wouldn't be very pleased with your bank if they said that. People would not be pleased with me if I tried to pull that shit on them. I owe amends because I've done wrong. A 7-year-old with morality knows that. A 7-year-old hides the fact it's broken the vase because it knows it's done something wrong. This isn't complicated. And this is about growing up very quickly and saying, right, I don't have to like it, but I'm going to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm able to make amends to everyone on day one of steps 8 and 9. Whenever I'm in a process of change, and amends is a process of change, there are other processes of change. There are all sorts of elements one simply can't face, but you make a list of all of the things which must be done, you do the things you can do, and the undoable things become doable. The amends I thought I could never make became doable when all of the other ones were knocked off the list. So one has, as it were, a universal willingness in principle to make amends to everyone, but the willingness in particular need arise only when the time comes to make the phone call, to write the cheque, to knock on the door. And that's important because, as I say, every time you make an amend, it makes some other amends, which are not doable, doable. So as long as there is an action I can take, I can continue motoring. So what does the actual making of amends look like? They say sometimes on tapes that amends are not merely saying sorry, or even not saying sorry. Some speakers say you should never say sorry in amends. I think on the basis that perhaps one has said sorry when one was drinking and using and didn't fully mean it, so the word is now tainted. I don't know. The book actually suggests to use the word sorry on at least one occasion. I think in relation to creditors, we say we're sorry for what we've done. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the point with amends is it's not about the specific word, it's about the principle of being sincere. And to be sincere, if one follows a certain process, sincerity is demonstrated. And the process is to first of all say what I'm doing. Now, one may or may not mention recovery and CA and God and all of those things, generally not in this day and age. If it's going to help the endeavour, then by all means. If it's going to hinder it, then don't. Although that saying one's in recovery, if what one did when one was drinking and using, it can lend the amend a greater degree of credibility if you can point to the fact that you are not seeking forgiveness in order to pull one over on them again, or to reset yourself in a position of trust, but because you're doing it for genuine reasons. If you're in recovery, it can lend this some credibility. But also, I tell you, it can backfire. Uh, I've sponsored hundreds of people, and lots of those have made it to amends. And I used to be incredibly formulaic about this and say, well, this is the system, this is what you say, and that's the end of it. And people were going around saying that I was just doing what I had done, and largely it worked. But people would go to people and say, well, I'm in AA or I'm in CA and I'm doing my step 9. And they got some very cynical responses. People saying things like, oh, you're doing that, are you? Where am I? Number 47 on your little list. You've got your list, have you? Pity you didn't get to me earlier. How long have you been in recovery? 3 years? And now you're knocking on my door. You see, it can backfire. And also, people have said to people in recovery, oh, so you're doing your little spiritual exercises. This is not because you believe you owe me an apology, but you're doing this for your own benefit. I think it's much better to go to people and say, look, I'm making this apology because, first of all, I harmed you, and secondly, I have been very, very tardy. I've been very late in making this apology, so I'm apologising first of all for the behaviour, and secondly for not having apologised the day after it happened. I know it says not to be servile or scraping, but a degree of humility is required here, and this is about them. This isn't about my little spiritual show I'm putting on. This is about giving them what they're owed, which is the apology. So I say why I'm there, which is to apologise. That gets rid of any sense that there's an ulterior motive. If one needs to say, and there is no ulterior motive, then say that. You then set out what you've done, write it down, have a list, don't miss anything. You express regret, not in a sort of soupy daytime television sort of way, but in a sincere and formal way. Find the language, practice in advance if necessary, ask people how to do this in a sincere and august way. You ask what you can do to set things right if possible. If it's very obvious you can't, don't ask that empty question. And always ask, almost always ask, is there anything I've missed? I've received amends from people. People have apologised to me. I don't think anyone in recovery has ever really harmed me. They've behaved badly, as have I. But people have tried to make amends. And I tell you, 9 times out of 10, they say all sorts of things I can't remember, and they've missed the big uns. If they say, is there anything else? I actually tend not to say. I say, no, you're good. We're good to go. I'll see you around. But I think with people outside recovery, you give them the opportunity. They can be even more offended by the amend if you've missed the big un. And if you say, look, I've done my best here, but I'm a dummy and I was out of it for a long time, and you might need to help me see where I've gone wrong here. I sincerely want to see where I've got wrong, where I've gone wrong, but I'm just uncertain. Then people will often tell you, and tell you in a reasonably kind way. Someone I know went to a parent and said that they knew they owed them some money, and they said to the parent, and I'm sure you won't have a record of all the times I borrowed money or took money. And the parent said, actually I have a ledger, let's go through it. So even if I wasn't paying attention doesn't mean they weren't. What else? I think it's terribly important. It says made a list of all persons we had harmed, and then made direct amends to such people. In other words, all. The 12 and 12 gives one the impression that you make some amends now, you make some amends later, and you leave some on the back burner. You leave them, as it were, forever, and say, well, as I said earlier, in God's time. I'll tell a story. If you've heard it, I apologise. A rabbi goes to a tailor and says, can you repair my coat? And the tailor says, God willing, it'll be ready tomorrow. The rabbi returns the next day and the coat's not done. The tailor says, I'm so sorry, but God willing, it will be done tomorrow. And the rabbi comes back, the coat still isn't mended. The tailor says, God willing, it will be by this afternoon. And the rabbi said, and if we leave God out of it? So a lot of this, in God's time, God willing, is me saying, I'm not going to take responsibility. If not now, when? When do you think you're going to be more ready? What readiness means? It's actually defined brilliantly on page 58 of the big book. It says, if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. In other words, to be ready is to want a particular outcome and to be willing to take the actions to achieve that outcome. In other words, readiness is a function of wanting plus willingness. It's not a separate condition which one tries to discern inside oneself. It's a function of two other conditions. So there's the condition of wanting the outcome. And the outcome I wanted was to stay sober and clean forever. That's the chief outcome. Everything else, all of the step 9 promises, are simply little bonuses given on top. But they're not the purpose. Purpose is sobriety or being clean. I wanted that. What does being willing mean? It means 4 things. It means being prepared to take action, and in doing so, to suffer pain, to suffer uncertainty of outcome, and to sacrifice what one might otherwise have done. And those are big elements of willingness. That's why the actions are difficult, is they require effort, pain, uncertainty, and sacrifice. So to be willing to make amends to people and to make all of them, to be ready to do this is a function of those two overarching principles. And I have to say, I was extremely unwell when I got clean. These days I can function extremely well, if I may say so, with the help of the fellowship and God. But I function very well. I can string a sentence together. I was not like this when I got clean. I don't have a video recording of myself when I first got clean. I was described in lurid terms by people that were at my first meeting or around in my first few months. I was very difficult. My behaviour was antisocial. I was shunned by people that couldn't handle me, and I don't blame them for 1 minute. These problems gradually abated in my first few years, but the last nail entered the coffin when I completed the last amend. There's something that ties you to the old life until every single one is made. And the threat of depression, which had hung over me my whole life and was present in a very fulminant way for years, left me at that point, as did anxiety. So they weren't there for the reasons I thought. It's my experience that psychic problems are entirely to do with my own beliefs, thinking and behaviour. Nothing else. Not the world, not external triggers. Not even being taught things as a child. I was taught this, I was taught that. So I was taught a lot of things, but what did I learn? the learning. I chose at some level within me, I chose to listen to this message, not that, to pick up this idea, not that idea. There were plenty of good people around. If you were schooled, you had good people around. You would have had other people too. But even in my family, there was one person who was very relaxed, very chilled. Did I imitate them, their attitude to life? No, I imitated the neurotic people. There is no one to blame here. Now, it's not my fault, in a sense, that that mechanism was within me to make those decisions, to make those choices I made. But it's absolutely not anyone else's fault either. And it's absolutely my responsibility to do something about it. I tried everything but the steps. Lots of different forms of therapy, all perfectly valid, reasonable approaches. But those particular nutcrackers don't crack a nut like me. The only thing which does is the process contained in the steps. And you don't need psychedelics to have a spiritual experience. Let's just say that. So, what else? It says, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Now, direct, there's a dogma which has gone around AA, who developed the steps in the first place. I haven't heard it so much in CA, but you hear it a lot in perhaps the older AA talks, that direct means in person. The phrase in person was available in 1939. It wasn't chosen. It was direct. Direct is the contrast to indirect. In person is the contrast to in writing. When you read the big book, some of the amends are in person and others aren't. There is talk of writing letters when the person could have been seen. The choice of whether or not to make the amend in person or in writing is a different question. Direct means to the person. In other words, this is not merely about behaving better. So let's get rid of any of this nonsense about living amends. I'm just going to be a nice person generally. You're obliged under step 12 to do that. You can't double count step 12 as also ticking off step 9. Even if you're being directly nice to the person you are mean to, you're supposed to do that anyway. That's what an ordinary human being would do. So you can't get any brownie points or bonus marks for doing what is baseline ordinary behaviour of a civilised person with some courtesy and some civility and some manners and basic morality. Step 9 has to be an extra thing. It's something on top. So the conversation has to be had. It needs to be addressed. It needn't be long, it needn't be elaborate, but it needs to be had. Now, whether it's in writing, in person, whether you grab the person, pull them aside and talk to them, whether you make an appointment, whether you give them a cold call, whether you write to them first, requesting a telephone call, whether you simply write a letter and put the amend in the letter, depends on so many factors. It couldn't be gone into in a talk like this. But what I would say is one employs the principles of the book, tact and consideration. People, when I think of people who've behaved badly towards me, I wouldn't appreciate being hijacked by a cold call or a knock on the door. That's not tactful, it's not considerate. Also, a lot of amends are going to address some very grave situations. And the amend is going to bring up emotion which is within the person. And I think it's grossly unfair to put someone that you've harmed in a position where they're being required to react to your amend for the harm that you did them with poise and charm and grace. Quite often people will get bad reactions in an amend, which is done on the hoof, or where they've cold called the person or knocked on the door. And the poor person is put on the spot terribly. They're full of emotion because of the situation, understandably, and they say something they regret. And so what I've learned to do is to approach this with tact and consideration. If people are in my life on an ongoing basis, then I can, and I'm especially if I'm seeing them regularly, I pull them aside and say, "Can I have a couple of minutes?" And I deal with it. If I'm on calling terms with them, I'll just call them. If the relationship is ruptured, I don't parachute myself into their day. I write to them and say what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I'd like to make amends. How would they like to receive the amends? In person, on the phone, in writing? And they get to choose. This is what being considerate means. Just because it's in writing doesn't mean it's casual or flippant. Often the only way to get a message across with real gravitas, with dignity, with poise, choosing absolutely the right words to get the message across is in writing. Most people don't have the gift of the gab. They can't improvise. They can't find le mot juste at just the right moment. They have to prepare. People often don't want to hear something that has been scripted and read out, but they're quite happy to read something which has been carefully crafted. When I'm sponsoring someone in 8 or 9, I get them to run through the written approaches or the actual written amend with me. My God, I've caught some corkers doing that. One has to be so careful with the wording. I mean, there are so many ways you can get it wrong. It's almost impossible to say how. There are too many examples. But essentially, making a sort of dramatic, sentimental show of yourself, making it all about you rather than about them. Uh, Covertly criticising what the person did, taking responsibility but trying to blame it on all sorts of things like addiction or emotions or something. There are so many ways you can get it wrong. It needs to be very carefully done. One person said, this was in a draft amends letter which did not go out in this form. They said, "I know I treated you very badly, but I've learnt such a lot from this process, and it's an ill wind that blows no one any good." Don't say that in an amend. Don't say how much you've benefited from the process of amends. Just don't make it about you. This is about them. So I'm a great fan of doing things carefully and formally and properly. And just because you're doing it in writing doesn't mean you're avoiding the person. This is not about bodies. This is about minds. This is about openness and truth and communication. And what you can always do, and what one should always do, is not close it off in writing, but say, "I'm happy to call whenever is convenient to you or pay a visit to discuss any aspect of this you would like to discuss. I'm willing to hear whatever you have to say." That's not running away. That's framing the physical meeting in a way that's going to work for both people. It's not meant to be punitive to the person that's making amends either. It's not meant to be humiliating for the sake of it. What else? Dealing with the person's response. Unfortunately, you just have to suck it up. They may say all sorts of things. It's rare. I got an earful from some people, and I certainly didn't get a medal from anyone. I didn't get a rosette pinned to my lapel for making amends. People shouted. As the book says, this doesn't mean you've done it wrong. It just means they're having their little 15 minutes of fame. They need that. Good for them. And I had it coming. Sometimes the shouting back was grossly unfair. But then so was the forgiveness. And people excused me for things I'd done, and they shouldn't have excused me. The things I did were rotten. So you get overs and unders. You get amends where people are unfair in a positive sense, and ones where people are unfair in a negative sense. And you take it. There we go. If you don't want people to shout at you when you make amends, think more carefully about harming them in the first place. And this was a very great lesson. This has made me much more careful how I treat people, because I don't like making amends. It's not supposed to be an enjoyable experience. But the best way to avoid it is to avoid doing things which are going to require amends in the first place. There's a little bit of time, so I'll tell a couple of stories. I wanted to get the technical stuff out because it's rare one's given a chance at this length to go into the mechanics in a systematic way. I hope I've done that. But there are some little stories. Except when to do so would injure them or others. That's actually a technical point I need to cover. The only way you can harm someone, you can injure someone in an amend, is to reveal information which is not already known. Because this will often cause the harm that you're making amends for. Don't involve third parties without their permission. Be very careful of amends where when to make amends would trigger disciplinary or criminal procedures. Those, by and large, do no one any good and cost a lot of people's time and money. This constitutes further injury. Occasionally, vanishingly rarely, such a procedure is necessary and right. I know people who've gone to prison on the back of a steps 8 and 9. It's rare. And they're equivocal now about whether it was the right thing to do because of the years that were taken and the cost to the public purse. One has to approach certain things with the utmost of tact and consideration. If you've harmed someone and the event is related in their mind to a significant loss, a death, or an abortion or a miscarriage, you want to be incredibly careful about bringing up the situation, because often your harm was the sideshow in a much bigger situation. But that's an example of where one must be careful in how one does it. But the golden rule is don't reveal new information. With almost no exceptions, you have to make up for it some other way in those cases. People who've died, write a letter, read it at their grave or at a place of great significance, or read it to an old person who can, as it were, receive the amend in their stead. Pay back all the money, face the creditors all at once, come to the best arrangement you can. Don't approach them one by one. You need to tell everyone what you're doing. So the financial amends need to be planned as a single exercise to make sure that all the legal debts are dealt with as a single block. The friends and family next, paying token or symbolic amounts initially, moving up to the full amounts. And then the financial amends for those items where they don't know you damaged the whatever, but you need to pay them. Those come after the people that are still burning up because you haven't paid them back. That's the financial ones. The people you can't find, I won't have time for the stories. The people you can't find, make a list. Once a year, go down the list and do your absolute best stalker sleuthing online. If you need to pay $100 to do some tracing of someone, do so. And I've found there are people I didn't find until I was 30 years clean, because opportunities arose. I met someone who knew someone who knew someone, and then the opportunity arose. So keep trying with those. But in between, you put a sort of sarcophagus over the unmade amends and say, look, the ones that I have done my utmost. There is literally nothing more I can do to trace these people. You're done. It's in God's hands. Check the list once a year, have another go, and then put it away again. You can't labour under the burden of those as though you have a sort of gammy leg or something. The freedom comes from the absolute willingness, plus follow through where follow through is possible. If they won't hear it, you write a letter and make sure it's delivered, and that's the end of it. I'm not responsible for someone else receiving the amend. I've had a couple of goes with a couple of people, and it's worked the second go. So occasionally your instinct will tell you that you can give someone a second go. But to treat those as done, it's graceless not to be willing to receive an apology. And that's on them now. That's not on you. If they won't receive it, it's on them, not you. You're free. Don Pritz talks about that. He got free when he was still in a prison cell because he realised he was willing to face everyone. And I have to say, steps 8 and 9 was a walk in the park compared to what I thought it was going to be. I was physically shaking in many amends, but I did the amends anyway, and I got through it, and they're fairly quick. And my time is running out, so I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening.